Back on Let's Have It Out on ENCA, I'm Yusuf Masutha. Another comment coming from our Twitter page, Imfundo says, and I quote, "I'd like to ask the Minister of Justice as to why South Africa doesn't implement the death sentence for people with 3 or more separate murder charges. Why still keep these murderers in jail? Feed them and take care of them," under the hashtag LHIO. Thank you for your question, Imfundo. Mr. Minister, capital punishment, a big debate. Your view?
Well, as a human rights activist, in terms of my background, I was part of the Lawyers for Human Rights, which advocated for the abolition of the death penalty following the declaration of a moratorium on it in 1990, which we hailed as a major success for human rights in South Africa, even before democracy. So my belief, of course, is that the death penalty does not per se serve as a deterrent.
But times have changed. Drastic times need drastic action, Mr. Minister.
Well, I'm not sure whether drastic should include the death penalty. Certainly, I believe Parliament, for example, has over the last 15 years introduced minimum sentence legislation to ensure that people stay longer in prison. And I can tell you the consequence of that is that with regard to long-term sentenced persons, the numbers have grown 400%, and that's contributed to the overcrowding. But that's just the reality. Society felt that punishment was not effective enough, and we needed to impose harsher sentences for more serious crimes.
Well, let's take another caller. We have Lawrence from Johannesburg on the line. Good evening to you, Lawrence. What's your question or your comment?
Good evening, Yusuf and the Minister. I'm just going to be quick. My concern is the issue of the minor offences, like the big crimes when people are drinking in public. Is the Minister considering to review, maybe even if it's not imprisonment, or how best are we going to deal with people who are drinking in public? The small broken window syndrome approach. People, when they get drunk, especially tertiary students, are giving us as the public a hard time, especially in suburbs like Braamfontein. How best are we going to deal with it?
Thank you for your call. Can I just add on? Thank you for your call, Lawrence. I think we've got your question. Mr. Minister, the small crimes are not being attacked. This week, I took up the position of the Tobacco Institute of South Africa because I'm passionate about it, although I don't smoke, to say let's take back the tax. The illegal cigarette raid is openly happening. Law enforcement is not acting. What's your response? When are we going to start acting and enforcing the law?
One of the issues that have been emphasizing as we confer as colleagues in government has been the need for tighter collaboration between the economic cluster and the criminal justice and security clusters to ensure that through collaboration we deal with issues of proliferation of illicit trade and the illicit industry more generally. And this includes money laundering, more serious crimes such as money laundering, illicit capital flows, which are a serious cost to our economy, especially given the challenging times that the economy has been subjected.
So are you saying that government will act? Are you giving me the assurance?
So I'm saying that as government, we're engaging each other to say, let's tighten the gaps. Even within the criminal justice system, I think there's a lot more tightening that needs to happen to ensure. But let me indicate that petty offences do not have to be should not be allowed to further clog the already burdened criminal justice system. Hence, we have the concept of diversion, which is to make persons committing offences take responsibility without necessarily having to take them through the formal criminal justice.
Let's take a last caller very quickly. Earl from Klerksdorp in the Northwest. What's your question, Earl? Good evening.
Good evening, Yusuf, and good evening, Mr. Minister. Mr. Masutha, my question is, on Monday night, I started a social campaign dubbed #It Starts With Me, urging South Africans to take responsibility to make our country better. My concern is that our correctional services, instead of becoming a place of rehabilitation, actually turns out to be a place where offenders become worse. And also the horror stories that you hear that happens inside these prisons, it's almost as if it's become acceptable and nobody's doing something about what's happening, especially the raping of young men in prison.
Thank you for your question. Very quickly, your response, Minister.
Well, first of all, the statistics indicate that over the last 3 years, we've been able to improve reduction in reoffending upon release on community correction or on parole from about 85-86% to about 98-99%, which means people who are released increasingly do not reoffend or violate their parole conditions generally. But specifically with regard to security of inmates in our correctional facilities, we're looking at exploring new things such as the introduction of CCTVs that would monitor conduct of our inmates from a security point of view, not only of fellow inmates, but also of our correctional officials to improve their safety. But over and above that, let me indicate there is a system in terms of which assaults are reportable, it becomes a criminal offense, even in prison where a rape is reported. There's prophylactic treatment that ensures that there is no secondary harm to the victim if it does happen, preferably never to happen at all. But of course, with the overcrowding that we experience in our correctional facilities, we indeed do have a challenge. What I would encourage, especially young South Africans, is don't wish to go to prison. Behave.
Don't do crime.
Don't do crime. Do the right thing. The more South Africans accept that that is the right thing to do and behave and live that a crime-free life, the better our ability to manage our criminal justice system.
I had a lot of more questions for you, Mr. Minister, but we're out of time. I ran a poll on my Twitter page at Abramji this week asking if our criminal justice system is effective, and 47% said no. 38% said yes, and about 19 or rather 15% of respondents were uncertain. Well, that's it for this edition of Let's Have It Out. Remember to keep the conversation going on social media with the hashtag LHIO. Tomorrow night, Amanda Vilakazi will be in this chair. You don't want to miss that particular show. I'm Yusuf Abramji. Good night from Johannesburg.